From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Romulo Lollato is standing by to talk about the recent evaluation of winter wheat varieties for their forage productivity this past fall. Useful information for you producers who rely on winter wheat as a forage resource for cattle. Also today, K-State's Peter Tomlinson will take a look at a new national coalition of scientists, including himself, which will be studying cover crop impacts on crop production systems. Peter will outline K-State's forthcoming contribution to that effort. And later, on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Ward Upham will talk of 7 new tomato varieties, which have just been named All-America selections. All this and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Thanks for listening in once again for Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. This opening segment will share information that's just been generated out of the Department of Agronomy at K-State. This is an annual undertaking by our guest and his colleagues looking at the forage production of winter wheat varieties for grazing purposes in the fall and carrying into winter. Joining us now, Romulo Lollato. He is a wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, as you know. It's interesting information, Romulo, the evaluation of winter wheat varieties grown in Kansas for their fall forage yield. This is something that you've been doing for several years now, and using wheat as a grazing resource, quite common in certain parts of Kansas, and for good reason, because this is a highly productive forage source, or can be.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, well, thank you for having me on air here today. Definitely, yeah. So the main advantages that I see of growing a winter wheat crop for dual purpose, right, or for forage now in the fall and spring, fall, winter, and early spring, and grain later on. First, it's providing forages when many other forages are not, right? So if you think of the productive cycle of the forages, most of them are summer forages and spring forages. So it produces a forage where there's a gap of other forages. But not only that, it's a very high quality forage. So you might have anywhere from 20 to 30% protein, crude protein in that dry matter. It has less than 40-45% of neutral detergent fibers, NDF. So it's a very high digestibility forage. What that tells us is that the conversion from forage to beef is actually quite high. Typically, we say it's about 10 to 1. So for every 10 pounds of dry matter wheat forage out there, now it's dry, right? We're talking about dry matter. This converts more or less into 1 pound of beef. So if a crop produced 1,000 pounds of dry matter forage, perhaps we can expect about 100 pounds of beef. So it's a very high conversion factor there, very high quality forage. So it's a high quality forage that is produced when there is a gap for most of the other forages available.
And those are great reasons why the approach appeals to so many producers out there. Your purpose in this forage testing program is just that, to evaluate varieties for their yield, and primarily yield alone, the tonnage.
Yeah, so actually in this trial, Eric, that we have been having for the last 5 years now, we are evaluating the forage yield of these varieties in the fall. Now, keep in mind that these are planted in a dual-purpose system. So they're planted mid-September. We put in furrow fertilizer. We put enough nitrogen out there for about 30 units of N for every 1,000 pounds of dry matter production that we have as yield goal. So before planting, we're putting close to 100 pounds of N out there to make sure that these varieties are not limited by N, because we want to look at their forage production potential. Then later in the spring, we're going to look as well at first hollow stem timing. So how late can each one of those varieties be grazed, right? So those are two things that we're looking. And then this trial, we're also simulating grazing on it. And so in the end, we are also comparing how these varieties yield if they were grazed or not. So we're comparing the three things that are important when you're selecting a variety for a dual-purpose system, right? So forage production capacity, how late in the spring you can graze it, or first hollow stem, and how well these varieties respond to that stress or the removal of foliage. Of course, ours are simulated grazing, so we don't have trampling of plants, we don't have many of the other things that true grazing has, right? And we're terminating that grazing at the optimal time, which is about first hollow stem. So those are the three things that we're measuring out of this trial. Right now, the only data that we have so far is fall production potential forage.
And you collected that data in December, so this is quite fresh information. The weather conditions this past fall weren't exactly exceptional for the emergence and growth of winter wheat, so that was reflected in the numbers, generally speaking, you say.
Yes, definitely. So we planted this trial on September 20th, and for a good 2 weeks we didn't have any rain in Atkinson, right, in south central part of the state. And so really some plants emerged with whatever moisture they could find, so that we didn't have much uniformity in that emergence coming up. But the majority of the trial really just came up after that rain in about October 2nd or 3rd. And so that delayed emergence, and so that decreased our forage production potential. And then after that rain, early October, we didn't have any more rain throughout the remainder of the fall, which that dry condition also decreases the fall production potential. So when you're looking at this data, keep in mind that there's some variability because we didn't have a very uniform emergence in the beginning of the season. Also, the numbers they reflect the weather conditions that we had this year, right? They are relatively low as compared to what the potential would be. That also brings another important point, which is what are the factors that determine fall forage production potential, right? Is it wheat variety? Is it the first thing that I need to be looking for? And truly, it really is not. So the fall forage production potential is going to be determined first by the weather in the fall. So how warm the fall was and how moist the fall was. So the warmer and the more moist it is, the greater the fall production potential that you have. Then management, right? Planting date and the effective emergence date, right? The emergence date or effective planting date and fertility, right? So the crop grown in the higher fertility conditions will, of course, produce much more forage, and an earlier planting is going to produce much more forage as well. Mm-hmm. For you to have an idea, a 2-week delay in planting can reduce the production potential in up to about 1,000 pounds of dry matter in the fall. So, again, if we would rank the factors, first would be the weather, right? How warm and moist the fall was. Second would be management practices as far as fertility and planting date. And third, we have varieties. There are differences among those varieties. Some of them, they're being bred for a dual-purpose system, so they typically are going to produce more forage. Others, they don't have some of those dwarfing genes, and then because not having those dwarfing genes, they end up producing more forage as well. So there are differences among the varieties, that's for sure, but the main things are weather, and then the other management practices being taken, and finally, the varieties.
That said, you do have the yield data for quite a lineup of varieties. We won't go through all the numbers right here today, Romulo, but producers can have a look at these right now and get an idea of what their varieties are doing vis-a-vis the other varieties that are in this trial.
Yes, so growers are welcome to see the full list at our latest agronomy e-update, but in general, the fall forage production of these varieties ranged from about 500 pounds of dry matter per acre, showing how dry the fall was, up to about 1,500 or 1,800 actually pounds of dry matter per acre. So there is a range in varieties. There is maybe that 1,000-pound range among those varieties, right? But keep in mind that that range is much more narrow than what we have based on weather and based on the other management practices. So the varieties that did really well and that they were statistically similar, right, in the highest forage group were Gallagher, which is an OSU variety. We also had WB 4303, West-bred variety, Rockstar from Polanski seed. We also had WB 4269 from West-bred, Paradise, another Polanski seed, Smith's Gold from OSU, and WB 4792 from Westbred. So those varieties, they were in the highest forage group. We saw some varieties that typically produce quite well, such as like Double Stop CL+. It didn't make to the top forage group this year. But the full list is really available for producers at our latest Agronomy e-update. Again, take this data with a little bit of a grain of salt there because of, first, our emergence was not very uniform, and then we had a 2-week gap between our planting date and our effective planting date or our emergence date because of lack of rainfall, and a very cold fall and dry fall as well. So take the data with a grain of salt there, but it does provide some evidence that some varieties are consistently yielding well. Some of these are repeating year after year in the high-yielding group.
Very well. Once more, to access that information, as Romulo said, it's as easy as having a look at the latest Agronomy e-update newsletter out of K-State. It was posted this past Friday at agronomy.ksu.edu. Very easy to find. And as well, you will be releasing soon, as we get into that season, the first hollow stem data that will be coming forth, and that's the signal for producers in as far as removing cattle from wheat pasture.
Yes, so we try to do that 1 or 2 times per week during that late February through early April time frame. We might have a difference in 10 to 15 days among the varieties. So be tuned to our Agronomy e-updates and here in Agriculture Today as well, as we will be releasing those updates as we measure them.
Well, we appreciate the overview of what you've collected here on December the 20th, as a matter of fact. The forage performance of various wheat varieties that were expressly put in the K-State trials to look at that this year. Romulo, thanks for coming over. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you, Eric.
Romulo Lollato is a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. The 2020 K-State Wheat Variety Fall Forage Yield Comparison can be found at agronomy.ksu.edu under the e-update newsletter series. This is Agriculture Today. We'll be back shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You are tuned into Agriculture Today, and welcome back. The use of cover crops for various land management purposes has really taken off in recent years, and we're going to talk about that subject today with Peter Tomlinson. Peter is an environmental quality specialist, K-State's Department of Agronomy. He's involved in a coalition of multiple researchers from around the country. Peter, you, another colleague here at K-State, and others will be pooling your resources and your talents to look at cover crops and their utility on the land, correct?
Correct. So we were recently received an award through the USDA Agricultural and Food Research Initiative through their Sustainable Ag Systems program. The grant in total is $10 million. It's a 5-year project led by folks with North Carolina State University and USDA, and it brings together folks involved in cover crop research from the Mid-Atlantic to the Northeast to the Midwest and the Western United States. And one of the key areas and where Deanne Presley and I will be involved in this project is 3 common experiments that are being done at a number of locations across the country to develop data that isn't generated just in one region, but the same data or the same experimental design will be used across regions so that we can look at some regional similarities and have these common data sets to gain more insight into the management. And so these three common experiments, one is focused around on-farm research, and Deanne Presley will be leading that effort. We're in the process of identifying 3 producers that will be agreeable to working with us. So in that, there'll be cover crops. We'll be working with producers that have incorporated cover crops already into their cropping system. We've got some standard measurements as part of this project that we'll be collecting and standard data that we'll be collecting, as well as the larger project develops some new technologies to gain more insight into how the addition of cover crops into our cropping systems may be affecting the overall management of those systems, and what we have for real-time tools, perhaps say to make an adjustment in nitrogen applications driven by a seasonal or year-to-year effect. And then we've got 2 other common experiments that I'll be taking the primary lead on. These will be more small plot based, and one will focus on developing data that will allow us to quantify potential nitrogen credits of cover crops. That will primarily focus around cover crops ahead of corn, but we'll also be doing some work looking at cover crop nutrient credits to soybeans. And then the second common experiment is really around weeds and pest and insect pressure. And so an opportunity to gather some critical data for producers here in the state of Kansas, but again, across this common platform so that we'll have comparability with sites here in the Midwest, but also in the South and the Mid-Atlantic Northeast.
Well, Peter, what you'll be focusing on, you and Deanne, expressly here, we really can't overstate the interest in this. For when you talk about the nitrogen effect, water use efficiency of cover crops, there are impacts on pest control, and that can broadly be looking at diseases, insects, weeds. All of that is of utmost interest to producers out there.
It is, and it, those highlight the management challenge that our producers are faced as they either look at adopting cover crops or bringing cover crops into their cropping systems, or for our producers that have been utilizing cover crops, the challenges that they potentially face on a year-to-year basis. And across Kansas, there's been a number of K-State researchers working on answering questions around nutrient credits, the need for it, how fertility recommendations need to change. A lot of work is done, but we've got a long ways to go.
And as far as the spectrum of cover crops, you'll be working with producers with previous experience, as well as putting out your own plots, your own ideas. So you'll be covering, if you will, quite an array of cover crops?
We will. There'll certainly be work looking at cover crop mixtures, as we look at some of the simple options such as cereal rye or triticale that we can get out and get well established, particularly if we're in a situation where we may have a late harvest and we're hoping to still get a cover crop out and up before the next crop. We'll be looking at the management challenges around that. Work that I've been involved with in the long-term cropping system study that Craig Rosenboom has led here. Certainly, we've got some cover crop options after wheat that we've found can potentially result in a nitrogen credit. We've got in the case of a high biomass cover crop such as sorghum Sudan, it's going to require some additional nitrogen inputs to maintain yield, and so this really provides an opportunity to dive a bit deeper into the questions around nitrogen management, the credit that can be generated from cover crops, and again by these will be replicated, small plot trials here in Kansas, but then we have the replication across the entire country.
Exciting in that there's so much to be learned here. And this will be launched this fall, you say, Peter?
This will start, really, we've been working hard getting all of our protocols developed, but the first cover crops for this project will be planted this fall, and then we'll continue that for about the next 3.5, almost 4 years with data from the cash crop generated in the 2021, 22, and 23 cropping season.
And when it's all said and done, there will be as comprehensive a body of information on cover crop performance and attributes of cover crops for all these purposes out there, handy for producers to use when all the notes are pulled together.
Yes, definitely. And one of the avenues and one of the things that allowed all of the researchers, over 100 of us, to come together is our association with regional cover crop councils. And so Deanne and I have been involved in the Midwest Cover Crop Council that covers the 12 states in the north central region of the U.S., and we also have partners from Ontario, Canada.
Well, you provided the ideal segue right there, Peter, to what we want to finish up on, and that is the forthcoming 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Council annual conference. It is set for the early part of February, to be exact, the 11th and 12th of February, and it'll be at the KCI Expo Center just outside of Kansas City. This is the first time that this meeting has been in this close a proximity to the Kansas area.
It is. It's a real opportunity. The University of Missouri, Kansas State University, and the University of Nebraska came together at last year's meeting and agreed to work together to host this year's meeting. We've had a number of planning and coordinating meetings over the last year and have, I think, put together a well-rounded program for our producers in the three-state area, as well as members of the Midwest Cover Crops Council that will be coming in on February 11th for the annual meeting of the Midwest Cover Crops Council.
The program, to be perfectly honest, is loaded with good information, and it showcases the very latest research and thinking, if you will, behind cover crop implementation. So without going through the entire program, which is a tremendous lineup, you would encourage producers to go to the website, have a look at that agenda, and get a sense for themselves of just how worthwhile it would be to attend this.
I would, and the website, that's mccc.msu.edu, and on that homepage, there's a couple locations there that say the 2020 annual meeting. Click on that, and it will direct you to the landing page for registration and the agenda. You are welcome to register online, or there is a link to print a registration form.
Very well. And it is our intent to have you back soon, Peter, to get more into the particulars of this conference. But once again, producers, go ahead and look into it. The 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Annual Conference, February the 11th and 12th at the KCI Expo Center outside of Kansas City. mccc.msu.edu is that website. As for the overview of what you'll be taking on in this new cover crops research initiative at K-State, Peter, many thanks.
Glad to have the opportunity to visit with you today.
He's a Research and Extension Environmental Quality Specialist in K-State's Department of Agronomy, Peter Tomlinson. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. For you now in brief, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. President Donald Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He signed that Phase 1 trade agreement at the White House yesterday, flanked by more than 200 in attendance, representing several sectors of the U.S. economy that should see benefits from the trade deal. The purchase commitments of U.S. agricultural products in the agreement are for a 2-year total of $80 billion. That comes from purchases of $12.5 billion beyond the $24 billion base period for $36.5 billion in 2020, $19.5 billion beyond the $24 billion base period. That would be $43.5 billion for 2021. Now, the package also addresses issues in China, such as their operation of their tariff rate quotas for wheat, corn, and rice. The U.S. successfully challenged China's operation of those TRQs at the WTO. As the country has not filled those for the commodities in question, the TRQs were part of the China commitments when they joined the WTO. The agreement also calls on China to set maximum limits on residues for 3 growth hormones used in beef production, and it removes the age limit on animals that U.S. beef can come from to ship to China. The agreement also has China committing to a specific timeline for approving new GMO products and has other biotechnology-related provisions aimed at preventing future trade issues. More on that agreement signing now from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Pens were placed on the paper Wednesday.
We take a momentous step, one that has never been taken before with China, toward a future of fair and reciprocal trade.
As President Donald Trump, joined by Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, made official the first phase of a trade agreement between the two nations. Vice President Mike Pence says U.S. agriculture is perhaps one of the greater beneficiaries of this deal.
Some $40 to $50 billion in purchases secured in this deal that'll result in greater prosperity for farmers all across the land.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, attending the signing ceremony at the White House, agreed with the vice president.
The agreement finally goes a long way toward leveling the playing field for U.S. agriculture, and I believe it will be a real bonanza for America's farmers, ranchers, and producers.
Once implementation of Phase 1 takes effect, the U.S. and China plan to enter into talks regarding the second phase of this trade deal. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, according to a leading USDA economist, the new trade deal with China may bring quick export sale increases for U.S. pork producers. More on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
It may take time for the new trade deal with China to be fully implemented and sales of U.S. products to accelerate, but USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson told us our pork producers may be the first to really see some significant increases in exports to China.
We would expect that pork imports into China will pick up very quickly. At the end of the year, they were still suffering from African swine fever and having a difficult time in repopulating their pig barns, and so the ability of the U.S. to ramp up production and sell to China is there. It's just a matter of having those tariffs removed because we will be a very competitive exporter to China when it comes to pork products.
Johansson says we can expect more sales of other U.S. livestock products to China, but China's most urgent need right now is for pork. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Also in the agricultural news headlines today, up to $75 million over 5 years will be provided for research on development of sustainable bioenergy crops that could withstand environmental stress and changing environmental conditions. That's according to an announcement from the U.S. Department of Energy. The funding will be directed at universities, industry, and nonprofit research institutions as the lead researchers, and they may collaborate then with DOE, National Labs, and other federal agencies. The funding will be awarded on a competitive basis in the form of 5-year grants ranging from $1 million to $3 million per year, starting in fiscal year 2020. The planned funding is for $75 million over 5 years, with out-year funding dependent on fiscal appropriations. Well, next up, the weekly feature we present every Thursday right here, the Kansas Soybean Update. And awaiting with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Teresa Brandenburg is joining us. She is a producer from Osborne, but serves as vice president of the Kansas Soybean Association. And Teresa, another Kansas Soybean Expo in the books.
It just seems like that these come around so fast, but we are so excited to have all of these soybean producers here in Topeka to share some time together in fellowship and really have a lot of great education. And we had a few laughs as well.
Teresa, during lunch, you also heard from the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to have Mike Beam join us today. We heard some comments from him about the state of agriculture, and he really affirmed for us just one more time the importance of Kansas on the agricultural stage nationwide. Kansas is a key player in ag production, and we know that, and we're very proud of that part of our Kansas heritage.
You had some additional things and some new things this year, too.
We did. We had a great keynote speaker. We heard from comedian Leslie Norris Townsend, and she really got us in the spirit. But some other really great things were we heard from some commission partners. So we heard from the Animal Agriculture Alliance and the U.S. Poultry and Egg Export Council, and they really updated us on the work that they're doing. And then we had a great afternoon hearing from K-State Research and Extension people on sudden death syndrome, cover crops, and farm finance. At lunchtime, we gave away some awards. After lunch, we gave away some yield contest awards. And we ended the day with David Shem from the USDA Farm Service Agency.
This has been an interesting year for 2019 because I think every soybean farmer would say, thank God 2019 is over. There's still a lot of unknowns heading into 2020, too.
Right. There's so many things that we can't control in agriculture, and that's why the Kansas Soybean Association and checkoff dollars are so important. We're doing the work to make it possible for soybean producers to be successful, both through research with checkoff dollars and then legislative efforts through the association. So we're managing the things that we can manage, and the rest we just have to leave up to Mother Nature.
And, having a comedian here, you would think, well, why? Well, it's something to make it loose and make everyone hopefully feel a little better.
Yeah, we know any time that somebody's going to leave the farm, we want it to be a great day for them. And that's part of why we incorporate the education, but we want people to come out and have a fun time and get away from the farm and get away from some of the stress, have a steak at lunch, and just really spend some time with other producers.
All right, sounds good. Teresa, as always, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Greg.
That is Teresa Brandenburg, who serves as first vice president of the Kansas Soybean Association, producer from Osborne, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. Well, home gardeners, we've word next during our weekly horticulture segment on new tomato varieties you might want to try out. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. We're back now on Agriculture Today. Time for this week's K-State Horticulture segment. We've some enthusing news for you home gardeners, whether it be vegetable gardening, flower gardening. There are now newly announced all-American varieties that you might want to consider for your gardening activity. And we'll be talking about these over the next couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, with Ward Upham. He's a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. Now, the All-American selection process is formal. It's rather detailed. Before we talk about our subject today, new tomato options, Ward, the process itself, you might explain how they rate these vegetables, ornamentals, and so forth.
Yeah, so what they do is they actually choose varieties that haven't been released before, and they are actually trialed against industry standards, some that have proven themselves over the years. And in order to make this list, they have to be better. There has to be something that makes them better than what we normally have. Now, they have a lot of different trial gardens, over 80 different gardens across the U.S. and Canada.
And we should mention who they are.
So the All-America Selections is the group. And so they have a number of different judges that have judged for years, and therefore they know what they're looking for. There are different levels that they can choose in order to have a very good variety. The very top one is known as the gold medal selection. That only happens once or twice a decade. To give an example of what a gold medal selection would be sugar snap peas. Before that point, we never had snap peas. And so it's a brand new breeding breakthrough and therefore is given the gold medal. What we do have for today are national winners. These have done well across the U.S. and Canada in all different types of situations. But we also have regional winners. And a couple of our tomatoes are regional winners. They're not national winners. They'll do fine here. And so we have 7 different tomatoes, and those are composed of different types of tomatoes. We have 3 slicers, 2 grape tomatoes, 1 Roma, and 1 that's referred as an apple-shaped tomato. And so a slicer is one where you put it on a sandwich. Okay, it's that type. It's a large tomato, that type of thing. Grape tomatoes think of them as cherry tomatoes that are born in a cluster instead of individually. And aroma is one that has less juice. Use that in canning, making spaghetti sauce, all that type of thing.
And then there's the oddity, which we'll start with. This is an apple-shaped tomato. Talk about its attributes beyond just the curiosity of it.
So it's known as apple yellow, so you know that it's going to be a yellow color. And the shape is a lot like a red delicious apple. They're small. These are going to be about an ounce each. If you think of a slicer, they're usually going to be 7-8 ounces, or they could be even a lot more, but that's common to be 7-8 ounces. This thing is 1 ounce. So it's smaller than a Roma tomato, but larger than a cherry. The fruit is described as being citrusy and meaty, and they are supposed to be able to bear up to 1,000 fruit per plant.
Wow.
That's a lot, but it is a good quality tomato. Mm-hmm. And so it's one you may want to try just for that reason.
Absolutely, if you're adventurous. And then there are the slicers, and you have several in the All-American category this year.
Yeah, we have several of the slicers. So, for example, Chef's Choice and Galahad, those are the 2 that are not national winners. They are regional winners. They'll do well in our area. Chef's Choice, if you've been following that variety, there's actually a whole series of different Chef's Choice tomatoes. What they differ in is color, okay? So in the past, we've had Chef's Choice red, black, yellow, orange, and pink. This year is Chef's Choice bicolor. And so it's kind of a yellow tomato with kind of streaks of red through it, or pinkish red through it. And so a good, sweet tomato, not super large, maybe 7 to 8 ounces, which is about normal for a lot of tomatoes, but it's one you may want to try. And then we also have Galahad. Galahad is a very large sweet fruit. It's about 12 ounces, so not up to a pound yet, but it has a meaty texture. It yields well. And then the last one is absolutely huge. It's called Buffalo Sun. It's our last slicer. It's a national winner, and it resembles an heirloom and bears huge fruit of 18 to 24 ounces. So that's over a pound to about 1.5 pounds. It only produces about 15 fruit per plant, but if you want something that'll completely cover your bread, this would be one you should try. Fruit coloration, again, is yellow, has some back color with red-orange flames. Interior is kind of marbled. So it's one, if you want a really big one, it'd be one to try.
So, again, those are the new slicers. The Roma tomato in the list? What about it?
Yeah, the Roma tomato is named Early Resilience. And it's used, as we mentioned, in cooking and canning, spaghetti sauce, that type of thing. And they're less watery. They will yield about 2 to 3 ounce fruit. Very good flavor and very good disease resistance. And so that's why they chose it, because of the flavor and because of the disease resistance. So if you want a Roma tomato, this would be one. Early Resilience, they may want to try.
And then the grape tomatoes.
Yeah, we have
2?
Yeah, we have a couple of those. First is Crokini, and I better spell that because it's not how you expect it. It's Crokini. So it's a grape tomato. As we mentioned, those are born in clusters. In this case, about 10 to 12 fruit per cluster. And each of those fruit is about 1/2 ounce. So they're not real large fruit. They are very sweet, slight acidic taste, and they have a crunchy texture and a good flavor. That's going to be one of our grape tomatoes. The other one is called Celano, Celano. Vines are large enough that you probably need to have them caged. Each fruit, again, is about 1/2 ounce. One of the judges summed up this variety by saying it was sweeter, the texture was better, the color is deeper, The plants are healthier, and the yield is phenomenal. So he really, really liked this one.
Had some accolades to it. Ward, we'd ask folks to go to the horticulture newsletter out of K-State for you full descriptives on each of these, which will give tomato fans yet a better idea of what they're all about.
Yes, we also have photos of each one. And all the verbiage and all the photos are taken directly from the All America Selections site. If you want more detail, you can go there. And it's just www.all-americaselections.org. all-americaselections.org. And they have more detail than what we've given in the newsletter.
But check out that newsletter as well. Simply search for the K-State Horticulture Newsletter. But Ward, once more, we yet have to talk about the ornamental selections in the All-American list this year. And we will do that with you next week if you'll return. Many thanks to you.
You bet.
Ward Upham is a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. And with that, our Thursday edition comes to a close. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.